So hello, my name is Ayaka and I'm a consultant with LSAT Unplugged. Thank you for joining us today. We have an exciting guest. He is with Learn Law Better. He has a website, which I was checking out the last couple of days, and it was really cool and it's super interesting material there. I have Professor Baez with us today, and we are going to have a conversation about, getting through our law school 3 years, and kind of what we can do to make sure those 3 years are worth our time and we are successful in the classroom and beyond. So first, I will turn the mic over to Professor Baez so he can give an introduction.
Well, thank you, Ayaka. I appreciate you inviting me to come talk to your audience today. Yeah, so I have been teaching for about 20 years. In 2017, I decided to start a YouTube channel, really for my own students, but it's kind of grown beyond what I thought it would ever be. So I've got about 65,000 subscribers, a couple million views. I think it is the most successful law professor channel on YouTube right now. Currently, I teach at the University of Idaho, where I teach tax and wills. Those are my primary courses for now.
Amazing. And when I got this year, I was like, oh, this is so exciting because I am actually applying to law school right now, or this cycle. And for those students, especially those students in LSAT Unplugged who are in the application process, our mind isn't really with that whole, what happens after I get into law school? What should I do to prepare? So I really want to kind of click into that and talk about that. So, we are all in this application where, letters of rec, LSAT, personal statement, all of those things. And we're not there yet in terms of I've gotten in and what do I do? So in your professional opinion, the summer before the start of law school, what can we do to better prepare ourselves?
That's a great question. And that was sort of my mistake when I was preparing for law school. I did take a summer kind of course. I won't mention the company's name. They're still out there. They have a much better product than they did back, when I was starting law school. But I would say the course that I remember taking was a very basic orientation to law school. We read a few cases. It was very inadequate for what I think most students need to be doing to actually prepare for law school. And the reason I suggest that you need more than that is because law school really does change your mindset. There's this, we talk about learning how to think like a lawyer. That's a real thing. And it's not just the education, it's actually transforming your mind. It's rewiring some of the connections in your brain so you think differently. And so the earlier you can get to that point where and I call it the aha moment. For me, it was in my 2L year, but I was a slow learner, apparently. For many students, they can get there much earlier if they start doing certain things. So the summer before, so let me step back. It is not primarily about the content. So that's what I've seen some courses out there, and they give you all these great lectures. I think that's almost a waste of time. I think there are better uses of your time. So yes, you need to get a sense of what law school is about, how it operates. That doesn't take a lot of time. But, what I do, I have a tutoring business, and what I actually do with my students, I give them a diagnostic test. We actually start working on assignments, show them how to case brief, the right kind of case briefing. Because when you start law school, they really show you, I think, the wrong kind of case briefing for most programs. So how to brief cases so you can keep doing that throughout the entire semester. And then we work on practice exams because everything is about the end. What's the end? Stephen Covey, the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, said, you always start with the end in mind. So that's the exam. So from day one, actually before law school, everything needs to be focused on how do I get top grades, or how do I position myself to become the best me possible?
Right. That's amazing. And I love setting yourself up for success. But kind of like an obvious question, but I guess I would put it out there. Why is it important to do well in law school?
Ah, yes. And again, that was my critical mistake because so many people like me, and I'm just saying, I'm guilty. I thought getting into law school was the end game.
Mhm.
That was it. I positioned myself. I got into an elite law school. I before I started college, I picked a major that I was pretty sure was going to get me all A's, and I only ended up with 2 B's in college. I did everything I needed to position myself to get into a great law school, and I did all that. Good LSAT, all the. But then once I made it, it's sort of like I didn't have another plan. So the reason you have to do well is because guess what? At the end of your 3 years and you graduate, there's something called needing a job. And the best jobs, they go to the people with the highest grades. So grades are very important in law school, right? Your first year grades, well, that helps determine whether you get onto things like moot court, onto law review. I mean, just so important because again, those things will help position you for better jobs, clerkships, all sorts of opportunities that you don't get if you graduate towards the bottom of the class.
Right. And also I would like to point out that, some people might have contingencies under scholarships. Maybe.
Yes, that's right. So yeah, that's kind of a new world. When I was in law school, that nobody really gave scholarships, but yes, so you have to keep your scholarship, you have to keep a certain GPA.
Mhm.
And that can be very hard to do. And the reason is scholarships are based on your college undergraduate GPA and your LSAT score. And there's a very low correlation between those two criteria and first year law school grades. So you may have a great LSAT. That doesn't mean you're going to do well in law school. Because guess what? Now you have all those people who got lower LSATs, they're in the same program, and they're working hard to do better than you. So you cannot rest on your own LSAT score and undergraduate GPA.
Wow. Okay. So many things. I'm like, oh my gosh. So clearly very important to do well in your, first year, not just your first year, right? Like in your career in law school. And you kind of mentioned, in law school, you're taught to think differently. And it sounds like it takes a bit and it's not automatic for people to get it and be like, aha, so is that something that's making law school, like the courses and difficult and rigorous, or is there something else like workload or the amount of reading you're doing? What makes law school kind of this different entity than just maybe your undergrad or your master's program?
Yeah, so I think it's for most people, they don't know how to study in law school. So I would say up through college, you have been effectively studied the same way. You've been taught one way of study. So let me read the material. And if I don't understand it, I'll reread it and reread it. And that's enough to get me by. And that was a great strategy up through your senior year of college. That strategy does not work in law school. So that's why I think people say it's hard, is because they're trying the same old true and tried strategy, and that's just not going to work. So there is more reading. It tends to be more complex, just material you've just never seen before. But there are ways of overcoming that, and that's just learning how to study differently. So you can't read a case more than twice. It's learning how to read a case effectively the first time you read it. So my recommendation is, first time you get a case is read it very quickly, like you would read a novel, just very fast to give you context for the case. Then you read it a second time more carefully. And that's just not something that most people have ever done before. The other thing is study aids. How do you use study aids effectively? You have to use them. If you don't use them effectively, you're not going to do well. So even before you read a case, you should read a supplement of some kind to give you a sense of what you're about to read, the context for the topic. Now, not a case brief. There are companies out there who produce canned case briefs. They just tell you what the case is all about. Well, then you don't learn.
Right.
Let's say that in your first week of law school, you're covering battery in your torts class. Well, read, a supplement on what battery is all about. They'll tell you that it involves intent, it involves harmful or offensive contact, that these are key elements. You should understand that before you start reading the case. Otherwise, you'll read the case, it won't make a lot of sense to you, and then it becomes much harder to learn later.
And do you find that students who kind of miss that first step, or, kind of stumble in the beginning, it kind of continues in their first semester, first year?
What I find is most people just follow the same process all semester long. They don't do a mid-semester correction, because the reality is in most law schools, you get one final exam. So they don't really know that they're not doing well until they get their grades. Now, after they get their grades, I do see people making a January readjustment when they go, oh my gosh, I got D's, or I'm at the bottom of my class. If you're in an elite law school, nobody gets D's, right? I mean, effectively a failing grade at an elite law school is like a B minus. So you end up with that B minus and you go, oh my, hopefully you realize that's a failing grade, but many don't. And they go, oh, I got a B minus. That's pretty good. I'm surviving. So you have to make that adjustment and learn what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. Now, going back to your initial question, the people who start preparing in the summertime, they start making those corrections before law school. So I'm working with students right now who are starting just in a few weeks, and they're making those changes. They now understand, or they have a better sense of what strategies were not working for them, what are, and what the law school game is all about. And one student, I'm convinced he's going to be in the top 10%. I just know it because I've seen him. I've seen his motivation. He's figured it out. And we haven't even started law at my law school. He's going to be somewhere else. But if I was a betting man, I would put money down that he's going to end up in the top 10%. No question.
Wow, amazing. And that's so great to hear that you can see that change even before you go to law school. Because I know I have a couple of friends who went to law school and they're started law school this year and they're nervous, they don't know what to do, and so there's a lot of anxiety there, and that's such a confidence boost to be like, I know what I'm doing coming in, so that's amazing. I do kind of want to touch on what you offer as a tutor. You mentioned before, you have a tutoring service with Learn Law Better, and some schools I've conducted with Alyssa, the other consultant with LSAT Unplugged, a couple admissions interviews. And in that, there's a couple schools that say, we offer this like summer intensive, like pre-law school program, usually about a week or two before the start of the semester. There may be other formats. Number one, is your course that you offer different, and how different is it?
Yeah, so I can't speak for every law school out there, what their programs look like, but what I find, and I've been at some law schools that have had those type of programs, and what I've noticed from most students is they view it as a waste of time. Like they hear, but they don't really listen, right? So they don't really take to heart the advice and the tools that they're provided in these programs. In fact, I was talking to one student here a few weeks ago, and he had one of these January wake-up calls, and he had one of these programs. He thought he understood, and I asked him, well, why didn't you follow the approach that you were taught, back at the beginning of the first year? He said, frankly, it was just pride. I'd done well in college, and I figured I don't really need all this other stuff, and so he wasn't willing to try new things yet. Now, he was in January once his grades came out, right? But till then, he thought he was fine, right? He did well in high school, he did well in college. How hard can law school be? So first you have those issues, right? So in my tutoring, it's one-on-one, so it's nice to have a group setting, and that's kind of what all these other law schools do. You're there in a class, and maybe you go through a brief or two. But I'm actually able then, after they do that case brief, is I work with the students. So my first session with students, that is very typical, stereotypical. I give them a diagnostic test, they do a case brief, and then they do a one issue essay.
Mm.
And most students come in going, yeah, this was so easy. I can't believe how easy this was. And then as we spend an entire hour going through one brief and one essay, they leave going, wow, I completely did not understand what this was about. And you need that one-on-one. And then what I do after that, that sort of gives me a baseline. And then I'm able to kind of, cater the tutoring session from that point on based on the student's skills and ability. So if someone's struggling with simple one issue essays, well, we keep focusing on that one skill till they master that skill. Then we move to multiple issues on an exam. And every person's different. So that's the great thing about working with a tutor. There is no one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
I remember dealing with one student about a year ago. He had let me step back for a second. This has really nothing to do with raw intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen very bright people not do well, and vice versa. People who are more on the lower ends do very well with a lot of work. So it really comes down to what knowledge, skills, and abilities you come to law school with. So I was dealing with this one student. He had been admitted to Harvard, and he had great skills. He had been educated in very prestigious British institutions through high school, and then in college. He went to Oxford or Cambridge, then going on to Harvard. We had 3 sessions. That's all he needed. I mean, he had a great foundation. And within a few sessions, he got it. Other people, I work with for a couple of years. So it just sort of depends on that foundation. What did you get before you came to law school? And then if you had a good foundation, and ultimately my goal is to not have you dependent on my services. I mean, it's always a bittersweet moment when a student comes to me and we get to that point where I've taught you what you need, and they're at the top of their class. I was dealing with one student at Syracuse Law, and C grade. She was very average in her first year. She was working 70, 80 hours a week. I mean, she was getting 4 hours of sleep a night, just trying to make it. And she was motivated. She didn't understand. So after, some sessions, by the end of her first year, she got all A's and A minuses. And I kind of touched base with her at the end of her second year, and she had moved to the top of her class.
Wow.
So it had nothing to do with her motivation, the amount of work she was putting in. Nobody was teaching her the skills she needed to succeed. And once I taught her, she was fine.
Wow.
We didn't need to work for, we didn't meet at all during her third year, and only one meeting in her second year. She got it. She moved on.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's good to hear that, it's tailored to that student and to kind of, work with their timeline. Some students may take longer, shorter, and, that moment where you feel like that come to Jesus moment where you're like, oh, I need help it comes at different points in that law school career is what I'm hearing.
Well, and it's interesting. I love the way you said that, the come to Jesus moment, because there are many students who just, after that first semester grades, their grades are good enough, right? So they end up in that, not the A and A minuses, but maybe the B plus and B range. So they're in the, the top half.
Sure.
And they come to believe that, well, I'm just a B plus kind of student.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really, understand that they can move to the top of the class with a little bit of help. And those are the ones I really worry about, because they have the potential, but they've just given up. They never have that moment. The come to Jesus moment.
Right. I love to call it the come to Jesus. Well, and in that, the students who are doing in that like upper middle-ish, who might not realize they're not on the right track yet, or they could be doing better. Does that affect their performance later on in that, they might just always stay that, or it might get lower, or
they tend to stay right there. They don't really move, because so the students at the bottom are very motivated to move up, right? If you're on academic probation, and now it's like, oh, if I don't do better, I get kicked out, right? They have that crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But the BB plus students, they're going, well, it's good enough. I'm in the top third, towards the end of the top third, but I'm still in the top third of the class. And so what they do is they just kind of do the same thing over and over again. And then they sort of go, well, it was just a tough course. On the class that they get a B, they go, well, I just don't get contracts. It was the professor was tougher in that class.
Sure.
I just don't buy that. I mean, sure. Are there some tougher professors? Sure.
Yeah.
Are there some classes that are harder to learn? Yeah, I teach tax and business tax. Yes, there are classes that are harder out there. But, how motivated are you to do well? And what are you bringing to the table? Are you willing to change? And many students just aren't willing to do that. They get comfortable thinking, okay, I will graduate, I'll be a lawyer, that's good enough.
Mhm. Right. And in that, do you see a difference with students who are non-traditional? So people who have had a career, maybe had a little bit of a break between undergrad and applying to law school or going to law school. I fit in that category. I have about 5-6 years of a career, and I'm looking to go back to law school. Is there a difference? I kind of get anxious because I'm like, I haven't been in the classroom in 6 years. What does it look like? I haven't taken a test in 6 years.
Sure.
So I get kind of anxious there. But do you see a difference in commitment level or, class taking skills and things like that there?
So for a while, I was at one law school that had an evening program. So the evening program was full of non-traditional students, right?
Mhm.
Many of them also working while they were going to classes in the evening. I'll tell you what I did find, a couple of experiences. One, I loved teaching the older students. They brought so much more to the classroom discussion. I mean, they had real world experience versus your typical, K through JD type student.
Right.
Because they could talk, oh yeah, I worked at the bank and I did this, or I worked in human resources, or whatever they did. And they were able to add to the discussion. I was a police officer for 4 years, right? So when you start talking about arrest and you get the real world sort of experience. So I love that aspect of the non-traditional student. And keep in mind, there's a range, right? I mean, many of them are still in their 20s and 30s, but I mean, I've had students in their 50s. So students in their 50s, that's a slightly different discussion. But let's say most of the non-traditionals we're talking about are, let's say, still in their late 20s, up to about age 40. So they tend to have the same feeling you did, just worried, can I make it? I haven't had a test. I find that they tend, older students tend to be a little bit more disciplined. Because you've had to be, right? You've been working, right? So now all of a sudden you went from college. The typical college student spends about 18 hours a week on their studies. That's in class and outside of class.
Wow.
So now you've been outside in the world and you've worked 40, 50, 60 hours a week. You're just more disciplined and you bring that discipline to the table. So yeah, are you a little bit rusty maybe on exam skills? Sure, but you can pick that up. That's not hard. And so in that sense, I think it's applying that discipline to your legal studies can actually give you a heads up over most of your colleagues.
That's great to hear. And in terms of your services that you provide, maybe somebody wants to work with you in the summer before their 1L year, and then leading up to exams, they want to maybe touch base with you again. Is that something that, I'm like, oh, this is something that I need right now?
Sure. Yeah. And so, and actually many students that I meet, so I'd say there are 3 cycles for me. One, you've got the people who are actually thinking about this and they sort of catch me in the summer before, and we start working through that period and to give them that heads up. So from day one, they know how to study and how to prepare for their classes. Then many law schools now are doing midterms. So then I get another cohort then. They get their grades back, and grades, it's a great time to start reflecting on what I'm doing right and wrong.
Right.
And then a little bit before finals, it's not too late, but it's harder, right? Preparing for finals should be a marathon. It's not a sprint. And the way most students deal with it is it's a sprint, just like they've always done in college, right? They would go to class, they'd be prepared, and then 2 weeks before finals, you go into the cram and jam strategy. You move everything into working memory, and you get what you get. Some students can do actually pretty well that way. I don't think it's an effective strategy. I think if you come up with the right strategy from the beginning, you can even do better on your finals. Oh, and then in January, again, once grades come out, then I start getting a lot of students who are just shocked, because they've always been A students. The next thing you know, they're in the middle of the class and they're trying to think about what they can do differently.
Sure. Wow. And then is it ever, for students who are looking to go into their first year, is it too early? Let's say, you get your acceptance in early spring, hopefully, when is it too early? When is it too late to kind of reach out to you and kind of talk to you about this sort of tutoring? I'm like, I want to get started on this right now.
Yeah, I think the earlier the better. I mean, what ultimately I'm teaching are academic success skills. These skills can actually be used in college. I mean, I've never expanded my approach to college students, but on my YouTube channel, I'll get a lot of people saying, "Hey, I'm in college now. I'm already using your skills. You're helping me now." And that's really all I'm doing. I've just sort of narrowed it to the law school niche, but there's nothing particularly unusual to what I'm suggesting in that it's just different, right? It's not, I should not unusual. So again, I think people go into college with skills that they learned in high school, which they learned in elementary school. And so they're just kind of using those same, there's an old saying that says, everything I learned in kindergarten. And there's some truth to that,
Yes.
At least when it comes to how we study.
And
so you're basically using those same knowledge formation strategies that worked well when you were learning A, B, C, and all those little things we learned back in the day. But there are better approaches. And as you get older, high school, college, boy, you really need to change your strategy. So by putting things into working memory, that means you never really learn them. So different strategies move things from working memory or short-term memory to long-term memory. So they stay with you.
Right.
And that becomes even more important in law school, because after you graduate, guess what comes next? A few months after graduation, you have the bar exam. And I've had students email me because I actually, in the classroom, I force my students to develop better study skills through pop quizzes, regular assessments. And students will say, "Professor Baez, thank you for doing that. I didn't like it at the time, but when I got to the bar exam, your course is the one I really didn't have to prepare for because I already knew it. It was in there." Versus their other classes, they're now relearning contracts and they're relearning criminal law because they never learned it to begin with.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds, I know the bar exam is like the next thing after, law school. And it's one of those where it's so daunting. But speaking of bar exam, going through not just 1L, but 2L, 3L, and then to the bar exam, do you provide support in that way as well? And does the level of, I don't want to say studying, but the rigor and all of that, is that consistent across the 3 years, or does it fluctuate or depend on the school? What is your experience there?
If you learn it right at the beginning of your 1L year, you don't have to relearn it later, right? It's the same set of skills, right? It's learning how to study differently, simple things here. Let me pull one out. So one simple technique that I use is the Pomodoro Technique. Have you heard of the Pomodoro Technique?
Yes, I use it all the time at work.
Yes, it's a great strategy. So most students don't understand. So for your audience, I'll just share quickly. So I'm kind of, the Pomodoro is the Italian word for tomato. The person who developed this was a student in an Italian college who was failing. He just couldn't stay focused. And by the way, I use this. I keep this here because I use it too. Anytime that I really need to stay focused, what I do is I set the timer for 25 minutes. And I like the little ticking.
Right.
That helps me, but you can get an app without the ticking if the ticking annoys you. And then it rings. That's one Pomodoro. You then set it for a 5-minute cycle, then another 25-5. So you basically go through 4 rotations of 25-5, 25-5, 25-5. On the 4th set, you take a longer break, 30 minutes. And it really just helps you stay laser focused on what you're working on. So, those are kind of some of the strategies. They're common sense. You're using them in the workforce. I'm using it in the workforce. I mean, I didn't know this back in the day. I only
Mhm.
discovered it about 4 or 5 years ago. And I find it's a good way of staying focused. So these techniques, whenever you learn them, then you have them for life because it's really about the process. I'm not teaching you the law. I tell people, look, I mean, if you want me to give you a quick session on some aspect of the law that I'm familiar with, I can do that.
Mhm.
But ultimately, if I show you how you can learn it,
Mhm.
then you cut me out. You don't need the middleman. Why would you need me?
Right.
But you do need somebody to show you how to study, how to prepare for exams. But once you've mastered the skill, the process, then the world's your oyster. Just keep using those same skills for all your classes. And now, in the upper level, to your point, there are different types of classes. So then for the first time, you encounter statutory classes. There's some, I would say, some slight deviations in how you prepare for a statutory class versus most of the classes you have in your first year, but they're very minor.
Mm.
So you might want, to approach someone again. There's some kind of different topic. It's sort of a different way of studying, then maybe that would be a good use of your time, is to reach out to a tutor.
Great. Yeah. And you know what? I'm so excited about the Pomodoro method. I'm like, oh yay, it's there. So and I totally agree about the study skills and having those tools in your toolkit to be able to kind of attack anything that comes your way. And I think I would love to kind of dig deeper into your tutoring service of, I know you talked about the diagnostic and in that first hour and kind of, showing how the thought process is a little bit different. Then onwards, if it's a summer program or summer pre-law school session, or even your first couple weeks of law school session, what does that hour with you look like? In terms of working with you and doing that.
Sure. So there are assignments. So again, the focusing is always on the end. The final exam. How do you write a law school exam? So, but once we get past the diagnostic, we're in the semester. Then it also becomes a time where I work with a student and they can ask questions. Look, I'm struggling with this. What do you suggest?
Mhm.
I can't seem to get this done. And so it is sort of an open session, it's a conversation between you and me and kind of working through on, because different things come up, have a professor who's doing this. How do you recommend I deal with this particular issue? So, and having taught at 6 law schools, I've taught thousands of students now for over 20 years. I have a good sense of the big picture, how things work, whether you're at an elite law school or one of the unranked law schools.
Mhm.
So it's very much a give and take. But ultimately, again, I'm trying to show people how to write that final exam. So one of the things I'll do is, after we go through an exam and the students now know what they should have done, the next session just might be, all right, rewrite it and let's talk about it again.
Right.
Because ultimately, you're training your mind to think differently. So just because you understand what you did wrong doesn't mean you could actually apply it if you had to do it again. So the analogy I use is the gym. I'm assuming, do you go to a gym from time to time?
Yes.
Yes,
Occasionally.
occasionally, right? Less so in law school. That's going to happen. You're going to run out of time. But anyway, if you look at that machine, so you see a machine with some weights where you have to do this. Now, if you look at the machine and you go, I understand how that machine works, and then you go on and do something else, have you built up any muscles by just looking at the machine and understanding the machine?
That's a very good question.
No, right? That's an intellectual understanding. So it's no different with writing exams. Having an intellectual understanding is not actually exercising your intellectual muscles. So a lot of what I do is helping you exercise those muscles. There's repetition. There's one student I was working up. So this is a great story. So there's a student here at the University of Idaho I was working with this past year. She came to me in January. She's not one of my students. She said, Professor Baez, I'm not doing well. I'm on academic probation. Will you help me? I said, absolutely, love to help you. And first exam that I gave her, I did the same thing. By the way, I didn't charge her. She's one of my students here. So anybody here in Idaho who's watching, it's free for you. Glad to help. But anyway, the first exam that she gave returned, I could see why she was on academic probation.
Mm-hmm.
So we went through it. She understood, right? She assented to what I had told her. Then I said, okay, rewrite it. Let's meet again. A week later, we met again, and it wasn't much better. It was a little bit, but marginally, but still, I would say, we're talking still bottom third of the class. All right, we went through it again, explained it, we worked through it.
Mm-hmm.
Third time. And you know what happened that third time? She got it. It's
Wow.
like, wow. And she, we went through a couple more exercises before finals. She was doing great work. She got off academic probation and did very well. I was
Oh, that's amazing.
pleasantly surprised. So she made it, but it's because me and there was one other colleague at the law school that were willing to spend our time and work with her and to show her, and that's what she needed. Now, not everybody needs that. Some people can read a book and figure it out on their own, but some people do need that one-on-one. Again, helping to exercise your intellectual muscles.
Wow. And just for clarity's sake, for the students who are listening to this, when you say, writing for an exam, we're not talking about, are you a good writer in the sense of like a novelist, right? Like we're talking about writing in the sense of legal writing, or that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, so very good, right? So we're talking about a stylized form of writing that would be recognizable to a lawyer. So it's a form of technical writing. And it's interesting you mentioned that because about as a novelist, some of the students I find that find it difficult to transition are English majors and journalist majors because they were taught how to write a certain way. And I warned people early on. I said, look, if these are your majors, watch out. And invariably, a number of people get upset. Like, oh, how can you say that? I'm an English major. I've written so many things. It's not the same type of writing. So part of it, coming into law school, I think you have to humble yourself. You have to just recognize, at least pretend, right? So I tell people, suspend your disbelief. Even if you don't believe what that crazy Professor Byes is telling you, like, yeah, he's out of his mind. He doesn't know. He doesn't know me. The students who suspend their disbelief, who are willing to try new things, they tend to do better. And then with the other people, they come to me in January after they haven't done as well. And then at that point, they've been humbled and then they're willing to learn. But there's no reason to wait till January. If you're willing to start now and recognize, yeah, I should be nervous. Nervousness is okay. Now I'm not talking about debilitating fear. That's a different problem. But nervousness is okay. Willingness to recognize that the skills that you've used in the past probably don't work well. And then what does work? And how do I develop those skills quickly so I can succeed?
Got it. So, there's just students out there who are like, I'm not a very good writer. And, in the application process, the students I assist, we get a lot of those who are like, I'm not very good at writing. I'm not very used to writing a narrative style. And I'm like, that's okay. The application is kind of a unique writing piece, and probably you won't do it outside of this application. And so I'm sure that's sort of true in that writing that we're talking about for law school. That's a writing style that is for lawyers and people in the legal profession. And so you will be taught how to do that. You don't have to get it.
They don't teach you. That's the problem. Most law schools, they do not teach you that skill. Now during that 1 week orientation or 2 weeks, I mean, if they're very generous, they'll talk about it. They may have you work through one answer, but again, that's sort of like going to the gym one time, practicing on that one machine once and going, hey, I've got it. No, you don't have it. You have to go back to the gym 3 times a week and you keep practicing. And that skill for writing an exam is not what we do in the classroom. So I would say the classroom discussion, the use of the case method or the Socratic method, if you prefer, It is indirectly related
Mm,
to exam skills,
mm,
but they're not directly related. So that means every week you have to do some practice on your exam skills. So one of my videos on YouTube is called FIRAC, FIRAC. And I show you how to use the FIRAC method for writing case briefs, because that is basically a short way of practicing a little bit of exam writing every single day as you're preparing for class. Now, that by itself isn't going to work miracles, but at least you are training your mind to think in terms of IRAC. But FIRAC is facts, and then IRAC, issue, rule, application, conclusion. So IRAC is the approach that most professors recommend you use in your first year of law school.
Got it. And, for the people who are listening, there's so many videos that have been published with Professor Baez. So highly encourage you. I've clicked on a couple and I'm like, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole. So I kind of Pomodoro method that one where I was like 25 minutes and I gotta leave. But it's so interesting, and I hope you guys check it out. It's so good. In your tutoring realm, if somebody said, hey, I know my final is on this day of the semester and I want to, create a schedule with you to kind of meet regularly, maybe not every week, but, every 2 weeks to kind of check in and do that and kind of have this cadence with you. Is that something that you provide? Is that too much? Is that too little?
Sure. So much of it just comes down to price, right? So if most law students are pressed for money, and my hourly fee is it's not inexpensive, it's expensive. So sure. I mean, the more there are two factors. One, do you have funds to pay for the tutoring session? And then secondarily, do you have the time to actually go through the exercises? Again, I'm not there primarily to hold hands and to, I do a little bit of that. Because people do get nervous and they need reinforcement. I'm not going to lie to a student, but if I see that they're doing well, I don't mind telling them, look, you're doing well. You've got this. You're going to do well. So once law school begins, most students find that they have very little time for exam prep. That's just the reality, or at least they feel they don't have the time because they're trying to read 100 pages a night. They feel overwhelmed. And again, they're coming from a world where they only spent 15 to 20 hours a week on their studies. And now we're telling them you've got to spend 60 or 70 hours a week. So it's just culture shock. They don't know how to do it. They get frustrated. Next thing you know, they're binge watching on Netflix or something else. And they're just not using their time effectively. But part of that, they've never had to work that hard in their life. So yes, so every week or two would be great if the student allocates the amount of time that they need for their studies and the additional work that I provide for them.
Great, that's awesome. Kind of sort of wrapping it up a little bit, but I do want to touch on what are and I know we talked about a couple of these, but what are some of the biggest mistakes that you were like, don't do this in your 1L year or even your 2L, 3 L year, don't do this. This will not set you up for success.
So students get very overwhelmed early on. It's just, again, the culture shock. So they immediately start looking for every hack they can find, right? They even start watching videos, the 3 simple hacks that'll get you through law school with 10 hours a week of, there is no such video exactly with that title, but you get the idea that they're looking for the easy way. And at first is recognizing there is no easy route. It takes hard work. But I'll tell you the couple of hacks that I think are absolutely destructive. So there are resources out there called case briefs or canned briefs, where somebody has an expert, a professional has read the case and then written a very nice, well-organized, detailed brief of the case. So what some students will do, they go, oh, I can read the brief and then I don't have to read the case. And now I've saved all these number of hours at night so I can play Call of Duty or whatever game I want to play on my Xbox. Or watch Netflix, whatever the other attraction is. So case briefs in particular, the canned case briefs, the commercially available ones, I say they're of the devil. They are absolutely the most destructive study aid tool. Now, I believe in study aid tools. I think they should be used. That is the one study aid tool that I am vehemently opposed to, because what happens is a student goes, oh, the case brief's pretty good, and it covers all the things that the professor talked about in class. I don't have to read anymore. That kind of is the mindset. So that is, I think, very destructive. I think that keeps you from really succeeding. I've asked this question to law professors from time to time. I'll ask them, how many of you case briefed? And almost every single law professor, when they were a student, case briefed. Now, what does that tell you? Well, to be a law professor, that generally means you earned good grades. So, so these are people who did well in law school, and this is one of the techniques that they use to succeed.
And so, what I get out of that, I'm sorry to interrupt, is that reading a case versus reading a case like the can brief, there's something different that you're getting out of it in terms of your understanding and what you pull out of it.
Yes, very good. Again, so I'm very process oriented. So most people, the mindset that most people have coming into law school is that it's about the content. If the case brief gives me the facts, it gives me the conclusion and the rule of law, the content. And I'll tell you right now, reading a case is not about any of those things, not primarily. If it were, then I would tell you, look, buy the case brief. Right. Because you actually have, in fact, I have a former colleague who's in that business now. I mean, he went to an elite law school, and I'm sure his case briefs are top notch. And I would highly recommend his briefs, his canned briefs, if that were the game. But the goal is to, by reading the case, there's a process. You read the case, you get into the judge's mind. You're starting to understand, to see what another lawyer, how that lawyer thinks. And so reading a case is not about the content, it's about the process. And as we read it and we see those things for ourselves, and we can identify, oh, there are the relevant facts. Oh, there is the rule statement. That is what is important about reading a case and then briefing your own case, not the content. Again, if it was the content, I could give you 3 or 4 different sites to go to and get great content, and you'd be great. But that is not what reading a case or case briefing is about.
Great. I feel like that light bulb went off for me, just a small one, but a little bit went off for me. And I was like, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. And what I would tell students is it's going to be a lot of work. So if you can't brief every case every night, that's okay. Can you brief 3? Brief what you can do. And I think what happens is most people go, well, I can't brief all of them. So then they give up completely. And then recognize, like any skill, you get better over time. So sure. So maybe the first week out of the 20 cases that you were assigned, maybe you can only brief 8 of them. All right. Well, then the next week, maybe you can do 10. And then in week 3, you're doing 12, because you're mastering the skill. And as you master the skill, you get faster at it, you get more efficient. But when you just give up early on, well, then you're not learning anymore, not learning as effectively as you can. And maybe enough to get by. I mean, there are people who get by, and that's kind of that B student I talked about earlier, like, okay, and they get happy with B's. Like, yeah, I'm getting B's, I'll graduate. Boy, a little bit more work. Why settle for a B when you could be an A student?
Right. Absolutely. Wow. Amazing. This time went by so fast. I feel like I learned a lot, and definitely going to contact you after I get into law school. I will be like, hello, it's me again. But before I let you go, I would love to give you the mic to talk about Learn Law Better and anything we sort of missed today, and talk about the services that you provide. I know we kind of dug in a little bit, but if you'd like to give a little bit more information.
Sure. Well, I think we've hit on it. I mean, so I have my YouTube channel. I've got about 160 videos, and that's, of course, just free. Please come and watch. I try to create a new video every couple of weeks. Just different topics, usually things that just kind of pop up in my life, and I say, oh yeah, this is something I should talk about. Be good. They're all law school related. Some will help you in your first year, and some won't. But take what you want. I'm actually just finished writing a book, so it's not going to help everybody who's listening to, well, depending when you listen to this, but I hope to have it out by October-ish. Got the final copy done, sent it out to a few of my colleagues in the academic success world who are reviewing it for me. But anyway, sometime, probably mid to late October should be out. And it's called, what did I call it finally? It's called Law School Success, Advice from a Law Professor. And it basically captures what I think are the most important concepts in my YouTube videos, because I don't want somebody to binge watch 162 videos. I mean, some people have done that and I go, bless your heart, that seems a little bit extreme. So yeah, the book captures those ideas, and it'll be about 220 pages when it's all said and done. And then again, depending when you're listening to this video, the next step, I'm going to create my own summer course, probably be at least have some version of it available for the 2022 summer cycle. At least that's the plan. So, and then of course the private tutoring, and I just help students as they need help. I help them around the world. I've got students in the United Kingdom. I've got students in Australia, throughout the US, Canada, because ultimately I'm teaching skills. I'm not teaching the law. And so I feel more comfortable in common law countries. I've never really tried to tutor somebody in a civil law country, but I suspect that would be very different. I think, don't know. So if you're calling, if you're watching this from Bosnia, give me a call. We'll talk.
Right, it's very different. Okay, great. Well, this has, I'm so excited. And this has me kind of giddy for that after that summer before in prepping, and it kind of highlights for me the importance of being prepared going into law school. Clearly, it is important. Clearly, it is important to your success as well as, your career after. So I am amazed at the service, and you will hear from me, and I hope the people here listening reach out when that resource is needed in your timeline. So thank you so much, Professor Baez. This has been a wonderful conversation. I've learned so much, and thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your time and great questions. I appreciate chatting with you.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.